But look, I got another job tomorrow, so I'll pay you back with the money I make from that.
Oh, okay.
Everyone knows Friends. 6 people, 1 apartment, 1 impossibly large couch at the center of a coffee shop that nobody ever seemed to pay for. It ran for 10 seasons, made 6 actors into the most recognizable faces on the planet, and became the comfort food of an entire generation. But here's what most people don't know. In 1994, behind the scenes at NBC, there were very serious conversations happening about pulling the plug. Not in season 5, not after a ratings dip. In season 1. Before the show ever found its footing. Hi, my name is Aaron, and this is Old TV Cinema. The world before Friends. So, to understand how Friends almost died, you have to understand what television looked like in 1994. NBC was in a complicated spot. They had Seinfeld, which was genuinely untouchable at this point. Yates, they had Frasier, which had just launched in '93 and was winning Emmys before anyone had finished their first cup of coffee. They had ER, which was about to become the biggest drama on television. On paper, NBC looked dominant. But here's the thing about having too many hits. It creates pressure. Every new show has to justify its existence next to giants. Every pilot that gets greenlit is being silently compared to something that's already working. And the network that looked so confident from the outside was quietly desperate for its next tentpole comedy, something that could grow. Something that could eventually carry the schedule the way Seinfeld had. That's the environment Friends walked into. Not a welcoming one. A competitive, high-stakes, I prove it immediately environment where patience was not exactly a virtue anyone had in abundance. The chaotic birth of the show. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The show was created by David Crane and Marta Kaufman, 2 writers who had worked together before on a show called Dream On for HBO. They were talented, no question about that. But a massive NBC primetime sitcom? That was a different animal entirely. Their original pitch was called Insomnia Cafe. 6 young people, New York City, coffee, relationships, the uncertainty of being in your 20s. That's it. That was the pitch. Not exactly a revolutionary concept. NBC executive Warren Littlefield has talked about how the pitch was fine, perfectly fine, but nobody in that room was jumping out of their seats. The network gave it a development deal anyway. And because what else are you gonna do? And Crane and Kaufman brought in Kevin Bright as a producing partner, and the 3 of them got to work. And then came the casting. And this is the part that should make every Friends fan deeply uncomfortable. Because the cast, almost wasn't the cast you got. Matt LeBlanc was not the first choice for Joey. David Schwimmer almost walked away from Ross entirely before the show even shot. And most shockingly, the role of Rachel Green was offered to other actresses before Jennifer Aniston, who was actually committed to another show called Muddling Through at the time, a CBS sitcom that ultimately got canceled and freed her up. Think about that. The entire chemistry of that cast, the thing that ultimately saved the show, was almost completely different. One network schedule change, and Jennifer Aniston is doing a CBS sitcom nobody remembers while someone else is ordering coffee at Central Perk. The pilot problem. So they cast the show, they wrote the pilot, and NBC did what networks do. They put it in front of a test audience, and the test audience did not love it. I want to be careful here because people throw around the word hated, and that's not quite accurate. The scores weren't catastrophic, but they were not good. The specific feedback that came back was that Rachel's character felt unlikable. She was introduced as a runaway bride, spoiled, dependent on her father's money, crashing her friend Monica's life without much consideration for anyone else. Test audiences found her irritating. And Chandler, who is arguably the most beloved character in the entire series once the show hits its stride, tested as confusing. People didn't quite understand who he was or what he was doing there. NBC looked at those scores and had a conversation that could have ended everything. Do we reshoot? Do we recast? Do we develop something else and cut our losses? They decided to move forward, but they made one significant change. They softened Rachel's introduction slightly and gave her a clearer emotional arc in those opening episodes, the girl learning to stand on her own 2 feet. It sounds like a small adjustment. It wasn't. That one note from a test audience essentially shaped who Rachel Green became for 10 seasons. Season 1's brutal ratings. Reality. Friends premiered on September 22nd, 1994. And here's the part of the story that gets quietly glossed over in every anniversary special and cast reunion interview. The ratings in season 1 were not what you would expect from a show that would go on to become the defining sitcom of its era. The premiere pulled solid numbers, around 15 million viewers, which sounds impressive until you remember that Seinfeld in the same era was regularly pulling 30 million. Friends was not a phenomenon out of the gate. It was a show that was doing okay, and okay was not enough. Not with the budget this show was carrying, not with the expectations NBC had loaded onto it. As the season progressed, the numbers fluctuated in a way that made network executives genuinely nervous. Some episodes climbed, others dipped. There was no consistency, and no sense that the show had found its audience and locked them in. By mid-season, the ratings conversation at NBC had shifted from celebration to concern. The show was sitting in the middle of the pack, which for a network comedy with this level of investment and this level of promotion was essentially a quiet emergency. The notes coming down from the network were getting more pointed. The pressure on Crane and Kaufman was building. And behind the scenes, people were starting to do the math on whether season 2 was actually going to happen. The budget crisis nobody talks about. And that math was not pretty, because here is something the anniversary specials never mention. Friends was expensive. Genuinely expensive in a way that made its middling ratings even more alarming. Shooting in New York is expensive. Any building and maintaining elaborate sets, including that iconic apartment in Central Perk, is expensive. And the cast, even in season 1, before anyone knew their names, had agents negotiating deals that reflected the network's stated ambition for the show. NBC had positioned Friends as a potential cornerstone of their schedule, which meant they had paid accordingly. Now they had a show eating a significant budget, delivering inconsistent ratings, sitting in a competitive time slot, and generating polite reviews rather than the kind of cultural conversation that justifies the investment. This is the quiet crisis that nobody talks about when they discuss the early days of Friends. It wasn't just that the show was struggling creatively. It was that the show was struggling financially in a way that made every rating point feel like a referendum on whether to keep going. Warren Littlefield has said in interviews that there were genuine discussions about the show's future during that first season. And given everything else that was happening, that is not hard to believe. The cast revolt. And then, because things weren't complicated enough, came the cast. By the end of season 1, the 6 leads had figured something out. They were in this together, or they weren't in it at all. The individual salary negotiations heading into season 2 had the potential to completely detonate the show from the inside. In most ensemble casts, there's a hierarchy. The bigger names get more money, the supporting players get less, resentment builds, fractures form. It's the story of half the shows that fall apart after a promising start. The Friends cast did something that was, at the time, almost unheard of. They negotiated as a unit, all 6 of them together with a unified position. Equal pay or no deal. Now, from the outside, that sounds inspiring, and the way it gets told in retrospect, it absolutely is. But in the middle of it, NBC did not find it inspiring. They found it infuriating. You have a show that is already a financial concern, already delivering inconsistent ratings. And now 6 actors who are not yet household names are collectively holding the network over a barrel, demanding equal salaries. The negotiations were brutal. There were moments where the whole thing looked like it might actually collapse. And if it had, if even one of those 6 had broken ranks or been replaced, thought the chemistry that was slowly, quietly beginning to work on screen would have been gone. The one thing that saved it. So, what saved it? Honestly, a combination of things that had almost nothing to do with the quality of the show itself. And I find that both fascinating and deeply unfair, but that's television. The first thing was scheduling. NBC made a decision that looks obvious in hindsight, but was genuinely bold at the time. They moved Friends to Thursday nights and slotted it directly after Seinfeld. Just let that sink in. Every week, 30 million people finished watching Seinfeld, and instead of turning off the television, they stayed on NBC, and the next thing they saw was 6 young people on a couch in a coffee shop. The lead-in audience didn't just sample Friends. Millions of them stayed. The ratings stabilized almost immediately. Then they climbed. The second thing was a single episode. The one where the monkey gets away, not a particularly famous episode by Friends standards, but it aired in March of 1995 and pulled numbers that finally gave NBC something to feel genuinely good about. The audience had found the show, and once they found it, they didn't leave. And the third thing, the one people never give enough credit to, was time. NBC, despite all the internal anxiety, despite the budget conversations and the ratings concern and the cast negotiations, gave the show time to breathe. They didn't yank it, they didn't shuffle it into a graveyard slot to die quietly. They made a bet and they held their nerve. And the show rewarded them in a way that probably nobody in those nervous mid-season meetings could have fully imagined. What legacy? Because what Friends became is almost impossible to overstate. By season 2, the show was a genuine phenomenon. By season 3, the cast was on the cover of every magazine in America. By the finale in 2004, 52 million people watched 6 characters say goodbye, making it one of the most watched television events of the decade. The show ran for 10 seasons and 236 episodes. It won the Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series. It made 6 people into some of the most recognizable human beings on Earth, and it has never really gone away. It sits on streaming platforms today, pulling audiences that would make most current television shows deeply envious. But none of it, not one frame of it, was inevitable. It was a rookie pitch, a nervous test screening, a mid-season rating scare, a budget crisis, a cast negotiation that nearly blew up, and one scheduling decision that changed everything. The margin between the Friends we got and a show that quietly disappeared after 1 season is genuinely razor thin. And that's the thing about television that I find endlessly fascinating. The shows that feel permanent, the ones that feel like they were always going to exist, they almost never were. Someone almost said no, someone almost pulled the budget, someone almost made a different call. Friends was this close to being a footnote, a show that tested poorly, cost too much, and didn't quite find its audience in time. Instead, it became the couch, the coffee shop, the thing that plays in the background when you're sick on a Tuesday afternoon and you need something that feels like home. If you enjoyed this deep dive, give the video a like and subscribe to Old TV Cinema for more. Leave me a comment telling me your favorite season 1 episode, because I have a feeling most of you are going to say, the one where no one's ready. And honestly, I respect it. Thanks for watching.